Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let go of the day. Allow yourself to relax and settle into a peaceful state as my voice gently guides you through a world of calm and tranquility. With each word, feel the tension slip away, leaving only relaxation and comfort. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep. Imagine the dimly lit halls of a grand palace, the scent of polished wood mingling with the faint smell of incense. You, a young boy, stand before an audience, the weight of a golden crown hovering just above your head, its cool, unfamiliar touch only a moment away from being placed upon your brow. The room is silent, save for the sound of your own breathing, the quiet murmur of nobles whispering in anticipation, their eyes trained on you, the future King of England. At just 17 years old, Henry Tudor, now Henry VIII, is thrust into the throne. His heart pounds in his chest, a mixture of fear, excitement, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. For years he has been prepared for this moment, raised with the knowledge that one day he would be the ruler of the mighty English kingdom. But now, standing in this vast hall, with every eye fixed on him, the gravity of the moment is enough to leave his legs feeling weak. The crown that will soon rest upon his head is heavy with centuries of history, with the blood of kings and queens who came before him. It is not just a symbol of power, it is a burden, one that he must carry for the rest of his life. But at this moment, as he stands tall, eager to prove himself, Henry cannot help but feel the promise of the future, the dreams of glory and greatness that lie ahead. He imagines leading armies into battle, expanding the reach of his kingdom, earning the admiration of the people, and achieving the grandeur of his ancestors. He is young, strong, and full of ambition, ready to reshape England in his image. But it is not just ambition that fills his heart. It is a deep and consuming desire for a son, an heir who will carry on the Tudor name and secure the future of his reign. The crown is not enough without the promise of legacy, and in his heart Henry knows this. Without an heir, all his conquests, all his triumphs will mean little. This, above all, is his greatest fear. The weight of history is not something that will easily be cast aside. The throne is now his, but the dreams of his father, Henry VII, and the bloody battles that secured the crown are still fresh in the minds of the people. Henry VIII's rise to power is not the peaceful inheritance of a long-established dynasty, but rather the victory of a young king over a turbulent past. And with this crown, Henry is bound by the same promise that has plagued his predecessors, to be a ruler worthy of his people, to secure his line, to leave a legacy. But as the crown is finally placed on his head, Henry feels the heat of the moment burn away his nerves. The excitement of being crowned king is replaced with something deeper, something more powerful, a sense of duty, a sense of destiny. He is no longer a prince, he is a king. And with that, a new chapter begins. Not just for England, but for Henry himself. The man who once stood before this throne as a boy, with dreams of glory, now steps into a role that will define him. A role that will challenge every part of him, his strength, his wisdom, and his very soul. For in the pursuit of greatness, Henry will be tested, and in the pursuit of an heir, his very heart will be torn. The king's life has begun, but what will come of it? His reign will be one of grandeur, yes, but also of tumult, of passion, of broken hearts and tragic endings. His ambition will drive him to the heights of power, but will it ultimately consume him? Will his desire for a male heir lead him down a path of destruction, or will it elevate him to the heights of legend? As you lay back feeling the weight of the crown and the promise of the future, you can almost hear the crowds cheering, the echoes of history already starting to take shape around him. The young king is ready for his future, and the world is waiting. The grand celebration following Henry's coronation is nothing short of spectacular. The air is thick with the rich scent of roasted meats and sweet wines, and the walls of the palace reverberate with the sounds of laughter, music, and the clinking of goblets. The nobles, adorned in their finest silks and velvets, dance beneath the flickering candlelight, casting long shadows that move like ghosts across the marble floors. Amidst the revelry, one person's absence weighs heavily on Henry's heart. The woman who will be his wife, his queen, and the mother of his heirs, Catherine of Aragon. She is not here to share in the celebration of his newly crowned glory, but her presence and the union of their marriage is the very foundation of Henry's rule. She has been promised to him for years, and their wedding, already postponed multiple times due to the political entanglements of both families, will finally take place tomorrow. Catherine, the Spanish princess, is a woman of grace and dignity, a woman whose beauty is matched only by her devotion to her faith and to her royal lineage. She is the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs of Spain, and she brings with her not only the wealth and influence of her kingdom, but also the solemn weight of political alliances that are crucial to Henry's ambitions. As Henry prepares for the marriage, the gravity of what is about to happen begins to sink in. In one night, he will go from being a young king to the husband of a woman whose bloodline could strengthen his claim to the throne. This marriage, while built on political necessity, promises more than just a union of two royal families. It is a connection that will shape the future of England and Henry's own legacy. But beneath the surface of this grand ceremony, the king knows that there is a problem. Catherine's inability to bear him a male heir. Their early years together are filled with joy and celebration. Catherine is the perfect queen in the eyes of the court, gentle and devoted, a symbol of the marriage between England and Spain. She is Henry's rock in the early years of his reign, a loyal companion in the face of growing political and military challenges. Yet as the years pass, the weight of their unfulfilled hopes grows heavier on both their shoulders. The birth of their first child, a daughter, is met with disappointment, and while they try again, more daughters are born, each one marking another failure to deliver the male heir that Henry so desperately craves. The royal court, ever watchful and ever ready to gossip, begins to murmur. Whispers of Catherine's infertility spread like wildfire, and the pressure on Henry to produce a male heir grows. His mind, once focused on matters of statecraft and glory, now shifts solely to the continuation of his bloodline. He begins to see Catherine less as the beautiful, dignified queen he married, and more as a reminder of his failure. Every passing year without a son is another strike against his legacy. It is this deep-seated desire for a male heir, a desire that runs through every fibre of his being, that begins to poison his marriage. The king's mind turns to desperate measures. His eyes wander, drawn to Anne Boleyn, a young and vibrant lady in waiting at court. Anne, with her sharp wit and her captivating beauty, represents the future that Henry so desperately craves. She offers him something Catherine cannot, the promise of a son, the male heir he believes will secure the future of his dynasty. Her charm is intoxicating, and Henry begins to entertain the thought of leaving Catherine for Anne, despite the loyalty and love Catherine has shown him for all these years. But, for now, Henry remains bound to Catherine by the vows he made on their wedding day, and the political necessity of their union. He cannot cast aside his queen without serious consequences, not only for his marriage but for his relationship with the powerful Spanish court. And yet, the question lingers in his mind. What if there was a way to make his greatest desire come true? What if he could have a son without giving up the queen who has stood by his side? The idea of divorce, a radical and dangerous thought, begins to grow in his mind. Anne Boleyn, meanwhile, waits in the wings, her own ambitions rising alongside her growing power in the court. She is not content to be just one of Henry's mistresses, nor is she willing to remain in the shadow of Catherine's queenly position. Her desire for the throne, to be crowned queen and bear the king's child, begins to eclipse even her feelings for Henry. She pushes him further, whispers promises of the future and of the power she can offer him, but only if he is willing to take the risk and make her his queen. In the quiet moments of the night, as Henry lies in his bed, Catherine sleeping softly beside him, his mind races. He wonders if the kingdom's future can ever be secure without a male heir, and whether this marriage, which once seemed so full of promise, can be salvaged. The weight of his crown grows heavier, and the pressure to produce a male successor intensifies. And so, with each passing day, the king's desire to break free from Catherine's grasp deepens. the seeds of political revolution, of religious upheaval, begin to take root in Henry's heart, seeds that will soon blossom into the greatest rupture in the history of the English monarchy. The search for a male heir has already cost him his peace of mind. What will it cost him next? The court of Henry VIII is a place of spectacle, where every glance, every whispered conversation carries the weight of political significance. Beneath the glittering surface, however, tensions begin to build, not just between the Queen and her rivals, but within Henry's own heart. As the years stretch on, and his frustration with Catherine of Aragon's inability to bear him a male heir deepens, the seeds of rebellion are quietly sown, their roots taking hold in the fertile ground of Henry's desires. Anne Boleyn, with her sharp eyes and fiery spirit, has long been a presence in the court. Unlike Catherine, who embodies the calm, unwavering loyalty of a Spanish princess, Anne is bold, outspoken, and full of ambition. It is not just her beauty that captivates Henry, though that is certainly part of it. It is her energy, her quick wit, and her undeniable sense of purpose. Anne is not just a woman who will stand by her king. She is a woman who believes she can shape the world around her, and her refusal to become just another mistress to Henry proves that she is unlike any woman he has ever encountered. As the days pass, Henry's feelings for Anne intensify. His love for Catherine, though still rooted in the respect of a long marriage, begins to wither. Every year that passes without a male heir seems to chip away at the foundation of his marriage, leaving behind a growing sense of desperation and disillusionment. Henry, who once cherished his relationship with Catherine, begins to see her not as his loving queen, but as a symbol of his own failure. In the court's gossip-filled chambers, Anne's influence over Henry is palpable, and though their relationship has not yet blossomed into anything more than a flirtation, the foundation for their future is already being laid. But it is not just Henry's affections that Anne stirs. The political ramifications of their growing closeness are becoming undeniable. The English court is divided, with some noblemen supporting Catherine and others, those closer to Anne, eager for a change in the royal dynamic. The whispers of the possibility of a new queen begin to circulate, and Anne, aware of the power that her beauty and ambition can bring, starts to weave her influence in a way that no other mistress has done before her. The stakes are growing, and Anne knows that she must walk a delicate line. She cannot simply be another mistress. She must be something more. The future Queen of England. The growing tension between Catherine and Anne is not just personal, it is political. As Anne gains favour with Henry, the support for Catherine begins to erode. The Spanish princess, once beloved for her piety and devotion, becomes a tragic figure in a world where the need for a male heir outweighs everything else. Catherine's rejection by Henry is a betrayal that she cannot understand, but it is one that she must live with. Though she remains loyal to her faith, she knows the clock is ticking, and that her position as queen is slipping away with each passing day. Meanwhile, Anne's ambition flourishes. As Henry's infatuation with her deepens, so does her desire for power. She understands that her place at court is precarious. If Henry does not marry her, she will become just another discarded mistress, a forgotten woman in the shadows of the palace. But Anne believes she has something that Catherine never did, a future. She knows that her beauty and her intelligence will carry her through, that her refusal to be a mere lover will make Henry see her as the key to securing his legacy. And yet, in the quiet corners of the court, as Henry speaks to Anne in hushed tones, the tension between the king and queen begins to erupt. Anne, sensing that her time is running out, becomes more insistent, her language sharper, her ambition clearer. She begins to demand more of Henry, pushing him to do what no king has ever dared: break from the Catholic Church, annul his marriage and marry her. Her goal, while cloaked in the veil of love, is ultimately one of power, for herself and for England. Henry, so consumed by his desire for a male heir, cannot see the full extent of Anne's manipulation, nor the full weight of the decision he is about to make. But Anne's influence is undeniable. She is no longer just the king's mistress. She is the future queen, the woman who will change the course of history. She has successfully captured Henry's heart and mind, and now the time has come to shift the political landscape of England forever. The court watches with bated breath, knowing that the king, for all his greatness, is on the brink of a decision that will reverberate throughout the kingdom and beyond. The cold stone walls of the palace seem to echo the tension that has settled over Henry's court. The once jubilant halls filled with music and laughter are now rife with whispers, gossip, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Every glance exchanged, every hushed conversation carries the weight of something unspoken, something inevitable. Henry's heart, once full of passion for Catherine, is now cold with frustration and resolve. He has made his decision, and though he knows the consequences will be severe, he cannot, or will not, turn back. Catherine of Aragon, now long aware of her husband's affections for Anne Boleyn, faces the brutal truth that her time as queen is drawing to a close. Her once immovable position as the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, Queen of England and wife to the King of England, has been shattered. The cries of her people, her advisors, and even her family have done little to sway Henry's heart. He has come to believe that without a male heir, without the promise of a strong successor, his reign will falter, and with it, the future of England. The days are long, filled with painful negotiations and heavy silence. Catherine, steadfast in her belief that she is the true queen, refuses to accept the reality that Henry has already dismissed her. Her resistance is not only fueled by love for her husband, but by the very fabric of her identity. She is, in her eyes, a rightful queen, married to her king and loyal to the crown. The notion of a divorce, particularly one sanctioned by the Pope, is unthinkable. In her mind, it is not just a personal betrayal, but a devastating blow to the very essence of her Catholic faith. Catherine's faith in her marriage and in her position as queen is unwavering, but the palace around her shifts like sand beneath her feet. Anne, meanwhile, stands poised at the precipice of her long-awaited victory. She is no longer just a mistress, a flirtation that dances on the edge of Henry's desires. She is the woman who has captured not just his heart, but his mind, his future. As she takes her place more confidently at court, she watches the dissolution of Henry's marriage with a mixture of anticipation and impatience. Anne's beauty is matched only by her ambition, and her ambition has now found fertile ground. She is not only determined to bear Henry's son, she is determined to be crowned Queen of England. The power and potential of such a title exhilarate her, for it promises not just a position by Henry's side, but a place in history, a place that will never be forgotten. The day arrives, dark and heavy with the weight of history. Henry, now resolute, makes the formal decision to seek an annulment from the Pope. The theological and political implications of such a request are enormous. Catherine, ever the dignified queen, must now face the possibility of being cast aside, of being discarded for a younger woman who has no claim but her beauty and her cunning. The clash between the old world and the new is underway, and it will shape not only Henry's future, but that of England itself. In a dramatic confrontation, Catherine stands firm, tears welling in her eyes as she looks upon the man she once loved, the man she thought was hers alone. "You may take my title, my crown, my lands," she says, her voice steady despite the breaking of her heart, "but you cannot take my dignity. I am your true wife, and I will not bow to your desires. I will not give you the divorce you seek. I am still your queen, and God knows it." The power in her words echoes through the hall, but Henry, hardened by his desire for an heir, looks at her coldly, already turning away. Anne, now in the shadow of her ultimate goal, feels the surge of triumph, yet it is tempered with the understanding that she, too, will have to fight for her position. She will no longer be the king's mistress, she will be his queen, but it will come at a cost, one that will forever alter her relationship with Henry and with England. The crown she so desperately craves is within reach, but Anne is keenly aware of the challenges she will face once she wears it. She is not the first woman to have a king's love. She is determined to be the one to keep it. But the true consequences of Henry's decision go beyond the personal realm. The religious turmoil that will follow his break from the Catholic Church is monumental. The Pope, unable to grant the annulment, excommunicates Henry, leaving him in a spiritual void. His actions trigger the English Reformation, a profound shift in both the religious and political landscape of England. Henry, once a devout Catholic, now declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England, breaking away from Rome and setting in motion the monumental changes that will reshape not only the nation, but the entire Christian world. The tension in the court thickens as Anne and Henry's wedding day draws nearer. The once pious queen, Catherine, is cast aside, her fate now sealed. As she is sent to live in a remote estate, away from the court and the life she once knew, the realization of her fall is stark. Her world, once filled with power and influence, now feels as if it is dissolving into dust. But even as her marriage to Henry crumbles, Catherine holds her head high, steadfast in her belief that her marriage, her title, her dignity are true and just in the eyes of God. And as Henry marries Anne Boleyn in a private ceremony, the full magnitude of the rupture begins to unfold. England, a kingdom once unified under a single spiritual authority, now stands divided. The whispers of the court grow louder, the religious and political implications of Henry's break from Rome becoming clear. The tension between faith and power, loyalty and desire, will shape not just the future of this marriage, but the future of an entire nation. The day that Anne Boleyn is crowned Queen of England is marked by a strange mixture of triumph and unease. The streets of London, once filled with the rumours of Anne's rise, now overflow with celebration, the air heavy with the perfume of roses and the sound of jubilant bells. But beneath the festive atmosphere, a deep unease simmers. Henry's decision to marry Anne and to break with Rome in the process has altered the course of history, but it has come with an undeniable cost. The England they knew is no longer the same. As Anne ascends the steps of Westminster Abbey, dressed in royal finery, her face is radiant, but her eyes reveal a conflict she can hardly hide. She is no longer the young lady in waiting, full of charm and promises. She is now the queen, crowned, powerful, yet painfully aware of the weight of her position. Her ascension to the throne is as much the result of Henry's desire for a male heir as it is a reflection of her own relentless ambition. Anne's heart beats with a desire not just to be loved by Henry, but to change the course of England itself, to give birth to the son Henry so desperately craves. But this newfound glory comes at a cost, for Catherine of Aragon, once a queen in the eyes of God and men, is now an outcast, abandoned by a king who no longer sees her as his wife. Catherine's fall from grace is bitter. Though her body remains in the halls of the royal palace, her soul is banished from the court, left to waste away in isolation. Anne, now seated upon the throne, cannot avoid the shadow of the queen who came before her. Though she revels in her new position, she knows the weight of her crown is not just the product of love, but of betrayal, a betrayal that cost Catherine her dignity, her title, and ultimately her place in the world. Anne, once Henry's mistress, now the queen, finds herself caught in the whirlwind of her own ambitions. The coronation has made her queen, but in truth, it has also made her the target of the court's scrutiny. She was not merely the king's choice for his second wife, she was the catalyst for the very division of England's religious allegiance. The English Reformation, set into motion by Henry's desperation for a male heir and his need to marry Anne, cannot be undone. Anne may sit at Henry's side, but the nation remains fractured, torn between loyalty to the Pope in Rome and the sovereignty of Henry's new Church of England. The clash between faith and monarchy now defines Anne's every action. For Anne, the pressure to bear Henry a son grows with each passing day. The palace that once resonated with the sound of festivities now feels heavy with expectation. Her every move is watched, her every word dissected by courtiers and by the people. The future of the Tudor dynasty rests on her shoulders, and as each month passes without the male heir Henry so desperately wants, Anne's anxiety begins to build. She is not just the king's wife, she is the symbol of England's future, or at least she believes herself to be. But Anne's ability to control her future begins to falter. The joy of her coronation, of being crowned queen, begins to wane as the months stretch into years. The first pregnancy, long awaited, ends in miscarriage. The second too brings only disappointment. Another daughter, Elizabeth, who is greeted with mixed feelings by the court, while Henry, overjoyed by the birth of his daughter, places his hopes on her potential future. Anne feels the crushing weight of her failure. She has delivered a child, yes, but not the male heir that Henry needs. With each passing year, the cracks in Anne's position begin to show. The whispers grow louder. While she remains Henry's queen, her hold on his heart begins to weaken. The king's infatuation with her slowly fades, replaced by frustration. As time wears on, Anne's failure to provide the much-needed son drives a wedge between them. The love they once shared, intense, passionate, and all-consuming, is now overshadowed by resentment and the growing realization that Anne may never be able to deliver the future Henry desires. Behind the facade of royal life, Anne begins to feel the pressure of her throne like a tightening noose. Her every move is scrutinized, her every word twisted and interpreted as either a sign of her strength or her weakness. Though the people of England celebrate her coronation, they are not blind to the tension that has defined her marriage to Henry. Anne's struggle to fulfill her royal duty to produce the male heir is becoming not only a personal failure, but a political crisis. The court, ever eager to shift alliances, grows more restless. With every failed pregnancy, with every disappointment, Anne's grip on the crown weakens. Meanwhile, Catherine, still holding on to her dignity, never loses her faith or her belief that she is Henry's rightful wife. She may have been cast aside, but in her heart she remains his queen. Her faith in God and in her marriage is steadfast, despite the pain of betrayal. The people of England, particularly those who remain loyal to her, see her as a martyr for the true Catholic faith, a queen displaced by ambition and politics. Her position outside the court is painful, but she never wavers in her belief that she was divinely ordained to be Henry's wife. The tension between Anne and Catherine, now living in the stark separation of two worlds, is as much political as it is personal. Catherine represents the old world, the world of tradition and faith, while Anne embodies the new world, one driven by ambition, desire, and the shifting tides of royal politics. The court, caught between loyalty to the queen, who was, and the queen who is, mirrors the growing divide in the kingdom itself. The tension that has been building for years now reaches a boiling point. The once thriving, jubilant court of Henry VIII, filled with grand celebrations, feasts, and pageantry, now feels suffocating and fraught with unspoken fears. The banners of hope that were raised in the wake of Anne Boleyn's coronation begin to lose their vibrancy, faded by the weight of repeated miscarriages and the harsh glare of the political and religious fallout. Henry's hopes of securing the Tudor line with a male heir have crumbled under the pressure, and Anne, now queen, is no longer the beloved, radiant woman who once captivated the king's heart. The weight of her failure bears heavily upon her. Anne's health, both physical and mental, begins to falter as each pregnancy ends in tragedy, either with a miscarriage or the birth of yet another daughter. Each failed attempt chips away at her sense of self-worth. Once bolstered by her charm, intelligence, and ambition, she's now faced with the cold truth that the very thing that was meant to make her secure, her ability to bear Henry's male heir, is the source of her ultimate downfall. Anne, once full of fiery ambition, now finds herself trapped in the gilded cage of her own desires, struggling to maintain Henry's affection and the loyalty of the court, which grows ever more fickle with each disappointment. She can feel the shift in the air at court. The courtiers who once praised her every move now speak of her with barely concealed disdain. The people of England, who once hailed her as the future of the monarchy, begin to whisper behind closed doors about her inability to fulfill the king's most pressing need. The whispers grow louder and the murmurs of rebellion stir as Anne's enemies at court seize every opportunity to undermine her. Among them, the ever-ambitious Thomas Cromwell grows bolder, positioning himself as a voice of reason amidst a rising discontent. With each failed pregnancy, Cromwell's influence with Henry increases, and his alliance with those who want Anne's fall becomes undeniable. Henry, for all his love and passion for Anne, begins to show signs of frustration. The once adoring king who serenaded Anne with promises of eternal love now turns cold and distant. Their once powerful connection, born of lust and ambition, now feels more like a business arrangement. His need for a male heir, once a passionate pursuit, becomes an obsession that drives him away from his queen. Anne feels his gaze shift, not only to his next conquest, but to the possibility of a marriage that could secure the future of the dynasty once and for all. The thought of losing Henry, of being cast aside after all she has sacrificed for him, gnaws at her, eating away at her sanity. The weight of Anne's failure is compounded by the growing pressure from the religious and political leaders of the day. The Pope, still furious with Henry for his break from Rome, excommunicates him, further isolating him from the Church and undermining his legitimacy in the eyes of Europe. The Protestant Reformation, which Henry initiated through his marriage to Anne, gains momentum, but with it comes even more divisiveness. The kingdom is torn between Catholics loyal to the Pope and the reformers who demand further change. Anne, once seen as the hero of the Reformation, now finds herself caught in a struggle that goes beyond her personal pain. She is not only fighting for her marriage, but for the very soul of the kingdom. It is Anne's realization that her reign as queen may be coming to an end that brings her to her knees. The truth, now obvious to her, is this: she has failed in the one thing that Henry required of her most. The passion that once bound them together has faded into resentment, and the political weight of their union has become too great to bear. Anne begins to understand the gravity of her situation, her fate sealed not just by her inability to provide a male heir, but by the growing mistrust and fear surrounding her. As Anne reflects on her plight in the cold solitude of her chambers, she remembers the fiery ambition that once burned in her heart. She had fought for this throne, fought for the crown, and fought for Henry's love. She had risked everything, and now she is left with nothing but the bitter taste of failure. She can hear the murmurs of the court, the whispers of the men who once supported her, now plotting against her, waiting for the right moment to strike. The fear of what lies ahead is a constant companion, gnawing at her every step. The court becomes a place of danger, not just because of her faltering position, but because of the shifting allegiances. It is clear to Anne that Henry's affections are turning toward others. Jane Seymour, the sweet, demure lady-in-waiting who has caught Henry's eye, becomes more prominent at court. Her gentle demeanor contrasts sharply with Anne's assertive and ambitious nature, and it is this contrast that appeals to Henry's wounded soul. Anne begins to notice Henry's gaze lingering on Jane more and more, and with each glance, her heart breaks further. The realization that she may soon be replaced by another, younger woman who can fulfill the king's desire for a son becomes a painful reality. As the months pass, Anne's fate seems sealed. Her enemies, both political and personal, gather strength, waiting for the moment when her fall will be certain. The king, once her lover and confidant, now speaks of her with detachment. His affection for her has withered, and the cold, calculating nature of his desire for a male heir has taken precedence over his once genuine love for Anne. But Anne is not one to go down without a fight. She clings to the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, her strength, her intelligence, and her charm might yet win Henry back. She cannot yet bring herself to believe that she has been discarded. Her pride, her ambition, and her heart refuse to accept that the dream she fought for is slipping away from her grasp. Even as she feels the walls closing in, Anne plots her next move, hoping against hope that she might yet retain her place as queen, if not for Henry's love, then for the survival of her own legacy. The once glorious halls of the palace now feel like a maze of whispers, each step Anne takes echoing with the knowledge that her time as queen is drawing to a close. The gilded crown that once sat proudly upon her head now feels like an iron weight, pressing down on her every moment, a constant reminder of how fragile her reign truly is. As the days stretch into weeks, Anne Boleyn, once so full of ambition and fiery resolve, now finds herself standing on the precipice of her own demise. Anne's heart beats with a mixture of fear and defiance as she watches the growing support for Jane Seymour, the young woman who has captured Henry's attention in ways Anne can no longer match. Jane, gentle and unassuming, has become the very symbol of what Henry now desires. She is everything Anne is not: quiet, demure, and most importantly, able to fulfill Henry's singular need, to provide a male heir. The contrast between Anne's assertive, ambitious nature and Jane's delicate, submissive presence only deepens the divide between Anne and the king. Henry's affection for Jane is palpable, and Anne can feel it, a cold, bitter truth settling in her chest. Anne, ever the strategist, knows that her position as queen is no longer secure. Her heart aches as she recalls the early days of her marriage, when Henry's eyes were filled with adoration, when he would serenade her and speak of their future together. She had fought so hard for this moment, had broken with Rome, torn apart her country's religious traditions, all for the chance to sit beside him as his queen. But now, with each passing day, she feels the walls closing in, and she knows that the love Henry once had for her has faded, replaced by a cold, unyielding desire for a male heir. The birth of Elizabeth, though a triumph in its own right, only serves to deepen Anne's despair. Henry, though doting on his daughter, has made it clear that she cannot be the son he needs. Anne had hoped that the birth of her daughter would solidify her position, but it only served to intensify Henry's frustration. The pressure mounts not just from Henry, but from the entire court. The whispers of Anne's inability to fulfill her duty as queen become louder, and the courtiers, once her allies, now eye her with suspicion and distaste. Every smile from a courtier feels like a betrayal. Every glance exchanged behind her back is a dagger in her heart. The king, who once held her in his embrace with such intensity, now spends less and less time in her company. His attention has shifted almost entirely to Jane, and Anne, once the most powerful woman in England, now finds herself utterly alone in a court that is as political as it is treacherous. The court, ever eager to shift alliances, is now beginning to turn its back on her. The nobles, once her supporters, now hesitate to speak her name in public. The writing's on the wall. Anne's reign is coming to an end. In a private audience with Henry, Anne stands tall, though every part of her body aches with the fear of what she knows is coming. She pleads with him, her voice steady despite the torrent of emotions inside her. "I have given you everything, Henry. I have borne you a daughter, a child who will one day rule this kingdom. I have stood by your side through all the tumult, all the upheaval, and yet you turn away from me as though I am nothing." Her words are sharp, cutting through the silence that has hung between them for so long. Henry listens in silence, his face inscrutable. His eyes, once filled with love and passion, now seem distant, cold. He does not respond immediately, and Anne can feel the weight of his silence like a crushing blow. He knows what she is asking, for him to remain true to her, to continue fighting for her to be the mother of his heirs, to fulfill the dream they had once shared. But Henry, torn between his duty to the throne and his personal desires, says nothing. The tension between them is palpable. Anne's heart races as she watches the king, her king, the man she once loved, who once worshipped her, now stand before her with an expression that is as distant as the heavens themselves. She knows in that moment that the love between them is gone, that she is no longer the woman who once held his heart. She is no longer the queen he dreamed of. Instead, she has become a reminder of his failure, a woman who cannot give him what he needs most. Anne leaves the meeting with a sense of finality, a weight pressing down on her chest. She knows that her time as queen is coming to an end, that the end of her marriage and perhaps her life is inevitable. Her mind races as she considers the choices before her. She has no allies left in the court, no one who would speak for her. The charges against her, adultery, incest, treason, are growing more pronounced, and Henry's resolve to rid himself of her has only strengthened. The marriage that she once believed in, that she once fought for, is now a cage, a trap from which she cannot escape. The days pass in a blur. Anne is consumed by the growing sense of doom, unable to escape the feeling that her fate has already been sealed. She begins to hear the whispers of her enemies, the courtiers who have long since turned on her, and knows that they are plotting her downfall. But Anne is not one to cower in fear. She has fought her entire life to be here, to be queen, and now, at the brink of her fall, she is determined to fight until the very end. In a final act of defiance, Anne writes a letter to Henry, begging him to remember their love, to remember the passion that once united them. She writes of their dreams, of the future they once shared, and of the daughter they have together, Elizabeth, who will one day rule England. It is a letter of desperation, a plea for mercy, but deep down Anne knows that it will fall on deaf ears. The king has made up his mind, and there is no turning back. As the days draw on, Anne's fate is sealed. The court prepares for her trial, her enemies eager to see her brought low. She stands before the king, her head held high, knowing that her life, once filled with promise and ambition, is now crumbling away. The man she once loved, the man who once held her in his arms and promised her the world, now stands as her judge. Anne Boleyn, the queen who once challenged an empire, is now at the mercy of the very man who had once been her greatest love. The chill of early morning air seeps through the stone walls of the Tower of London, and Anne Boleyn, once the dazzling Queen of England, now sits in silence, her back against the cold stone of her prison cell. The days have blurred into each other, each one more oppressive than the last. The once vibrant colours of the court seem like a distant memory, as muted as the pale light filtering through the narrow window. The heavy clink of chains and the hushed voices of the guards outside are the only sounds that pierce the oppressive silence. Inside her cell, Anne's mind races, torn between the bitter reality of her situation and the fierce defiance that refuses to surrender. Her fate, once so uncertain, is now painfully clear. The trial is set. The charges, adultery, incest, treason, have been laid out against her, each one more devastating than the last. Her enemies have been quick to capitalize on her downfall, whispering false accusations that will soon be used to seal her fate. Anne knows this well. The trial is a mere formality, a show of power to finalize what has already been decided by Henry and his court. She is a woman cornered, no longer the queen who once ruled at his side, but the accused, a pawn in the hands of those who have turned against her. The weight of her situation presses on Anne's chest, but still she holds her head high. Her mind drifts to the man who once filled her heart with so much hope. Henry. He was her king, her lover, the man who had promised her the world, and in return she had given him everything. She had broken with Rome, torn apart the church, and risked everything for him. But now, in this dark cell, she wonders if it was all in vain. Had Henry ever truly loved her, or was she merely a means to an end, a stepping stone in his relentless pursuit of power? As she is led from her cell to the grand hall, where her trial will take place, Anne tries to summon the courage to face the world outside, but fear claws at her. The cool, damp air stirs the hem of her gown as she walks through the dimly lit corridors of the tower, the echo of her footsteps amplifying the dread that tightens in her throat. She knows the charges are false. She knows that she has never been unfaithful to Henry, that her heart has always belonged to him, even as his heart shifted away from her. But in this court, truth no longer holds sway. The politics of the crown, the desires of the powerful, have already decided her fate. As Anne steps into the courtroom, the weight of the stares from the assembled nobility presses down on her like an invisible hand. Her once supporters now watch her with cold, calculating eyes. Their loyalties already shifted. The murmurs in the room are not of sympathy, but of glee, as they watch the queen who once held such power now stand as an accused woman, vulnerable and exposed. The trial is not about justice, it is about the preservation of Henry's rule and the political maneuvering of his court. The prosecutor, a man who once fawned at Anne's feet, now stands before her, delivering his accusations with a venom that sends chills through her. Anne listens, her heart pounding, but her resolve unbroken. She knows the accusations against her are baseless, built from lies and deceit, but she also knows that in this moment, truth does not matter. She can see the faces of the men and women in the court, their eyes cold with judgment, some gleaming with the hope that her demise will further their own interests. She is not just fighting for her life, she is fighting for her legacy, for the very essence of her being. Throughout the trial, Anne remains composed, answering the questions with a clarity that contrasts sharply with the lies being spun about her. She does not break, does not crumble under the weight of the accusations. She knows that to do so would be to give them the victory they seek. And yet, with each passing moment, as the case against her is built with false testimony and fabricated evidence, she feels the walls closing in. She is alone, betrayed by the very man who once swore to love her. As the trial nears its end, Anne's fate is sealed. The verdict is read aloud, guilty. The charge of treason carries with it the death sentence, a final brutal punishment for the woman who once dared to challenge the very fabric of English tradition. Anne's heart sinks, but she does not weep. Instead, she stands tall, her dignity intact, as the full weight of her fall begins to settle upon her. She has lost everything, her title, her husband's love, her future, but she will not lose her pride. In the final moments before she's led away, Anne reflects on the life she has lived. She remembers her ambition, her hopes, her love for Henry, and the way she fought for the chance to be queen. She recalls the early days of her marriage, when Henry's eyes shone with admiration, when she believed in the future they would build together. Now she knows that the man who once loved her is gone, replaced by a monarch driven by political necessity, by the desire to secure his line and his power. As she is led to her execution, Anne does not flinch. She walks with grace, her head held high, as she approaches the scaffold. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows across the cold ground beneath her feet. In this final moment, Anne is no longer the ambitious queen, nor the discarded wife. She is simply a woman, facing the end of her story with the quiet strength that has defined her life. She may have lost everything, but her dignity remains, untouched by the lies and betrayals that have marked her fall. Anne Boleyn, the woman who once changed the course of English history, now fades into history herself. Her legacy, though tragic, will not be forgotten. Her daughter, Elizabeth, will rise to greatness, and her name will be remembered not as that of a fallen queen, but as the mother of one of the greatest monarchs in history. As Anne's life comes to its final, tragic conclusion, the people who once adored her now watch in silence. The reign of Anne Boleyn, once so full of promise, has ended, but in the stillness of her last moments, she remains defiant, her spirit unbroken by the forces that sought to bring her down. The days following Anne Boleyn's tragic death are heavy with the silence of history, the air thick with the sorrow and weight of her fall. As the scaffold stands empty and the executioner's axe is sheathed, the kingdom begins to move forward, as all kingdoms must. But Anne's legacy, the legacy of the woman who once ruled England's heart and whose name was once whispered in awe, lingers in the hushed corners of the court and the whispered prayers of her people. Her life, though brief and marred by betrayal, is not forgotten, for her bloodline carries a future that will change the course of England forever. In the years that follow Anne's execution, the court, ever fickle and ever hungry for power, quickly shifts its gaze toward Jane Seymour, the next woman to capture Henry's heart. Yet, even as Henry marries again, as Jane becomes queen and bears Henry the long-desired son, the shadow of Anne Boleyn remains, an indelible mark on the soul of the kingdom. Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, still a mere infant when her mother was executed, grows up in the confines of the royal palace, her life shaped by the ghosts of the past. The whispers of her mother's rise and fall are never far from the minds of those who serve her. The weight of her mother's legacy hangs like an invisible cloak around her shoulders, as if Anne's ambitions and tragedies are sewn into the very fabric of Elizabeth's existence. Though Elizabeth is a child of a queen who had been declared an adulteress and a traitor, she is also a symbol of England's future, a future that is yet to be fully realized, but one that carries the promise of greatness. As Elizabeth grows, she is carefully watched by those in her father's court. Her every word, every glance is measured with an eye toward the possibility of what she might one day become. Her relationship with her father, Henry, is complex. In her early years, he is distant and often absent, consumed by the trials of his own marriages and the political storms that swirl around him. Henry's love for his daughter is genuine, but it is colored by his own feelings of loss and disappointment. He had sought a son for so long, and while Elizabeth is a brilliant, capable child, she is not the son he needed. Still, she is his blood, and in her, he sees a glimmer of the greatness that could come from the Tudor line. But Elizabeth is not simply a child of a king. She is the daughter of Anne Boleyn, and the history of her mother's life and her death is something she cannot escape. She hears the whispers, she feels the weight of the crown that will one day rest on her brow. She knows that her mother's tragic fate, her execution, the betrayal of those closest to her, is written into the very bones of her lineage. She is a living legacy of a queen who was once loved and admired, only to be torn down by the forces of politics ambition, and betrayal. The years pass, and Elizabeth comes of age in a world that is far different from the one her mother knew. The death of Henry VIII and the subsequent turmoil of his son Edward VI's short reign leave England in a state of uncertainty. But Elizabeth, ever the keen observer, learns from the rise and fall of those around her. She watches as her half-sister Mary I, the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, ascends to the throne only to face rebellion, war, and religious persecution. Elizabeth sees the weight of her mother's struggle reflected in Mary's own challenges, and she learns, perhaps more than any of her siblings, the importance of survival in a world that is shaped by power and betrayal. When Elizabeth finally ascends to the throne, she does so not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of endurance. The woman who has lived her life in the shadow of Anne Boleyn's fate now stands as the Queen of England, and in her reign she proves that the ambition, intelligence, and strength that her mother once held, though tragically unfulfilled, were not in vain. Elizabeth, like Anne, must face the trials of being a woman in a man's world, a queen whose bloodline was once tainted by scandal, yet whose intelligence and resolve will allow her to rule for over 4 decades, ushering in a period of unmatched cultural and political achievement. In the quiet chambers of Elizabeth's court, away from the eyes of the world, her thoughts often return to her mother. Elizabeth knows that the crown she wears is not just her own. It is the crown that Anne Boleyn once sought. She has inherited the dreams and the suffering of a woman who dared to reach for greatness and who paid the ultimate price for it. Yet Elizabeth, in her wisdom and strength, learns to wear that crown not as a burden, but as a symbol of the strength of her line. As she sits alone in her royal chambers, Elizabeth's thoughts drift back to the stories of her mother. She imagines Anne, full of ambition and love, standing tall beside Henry in the early days of their marriage, full of dreams of a dynasty that would last for generations. She imagines Anne's last moments, standing tall even in the face of death, her dignity intact despite the betrayal that surrounded her. Elizabeth wonders what her mother would have thought of the woman she has become, the queen she has grown into, and the legacy she has created. In that quiet, reflective moment, Elizabeth makes a silent vow to her mother. She will not allow Anne's death, her fall from grace, to be the final word on her legacy. Instead, Elizabeth will write the final chapter, not as the daughter of a queen who fell, but as the queen who rose. The story of Anne Boleyn, though tragic, will be forever intertwined with Elizabeth's own. Through her triumph, her wisdom, and her strength, Elizabeth ensures that Anne's legacy lives on, not as a cautionary tale of ambition gone wrong, but as the foundation upon which a new, stronger England will rise. As Elizabeth I sat upon her throne, the weight of history hung heavy in the air, a silent but persistent presence in the chambers of her royal court. The banners of the Tudor dynasty waved proudly, but beneath them lay the complex and often painful legacy of her mother, Anne Boleyn. Though Elizabeth had risen to power through sheer intellect, resilience, and wit, the shadow of Anne's fall never fully faded. For as long as Elizabeth lived, her mother's story, filled with ambition, tragedy, betrayal, and death, would haunt her, whether she wished it or not. Elizabeth's reign had been marked by her strength and the triumphs of her rule, but those moments of victory were tempered by the knowledge that her mother's dreams had been dashed so violently. Anne had sacrificed everything for the chance to wear the crown, and, in doing so, had given birth to a daughter who would inherit not just the crown, but the pain and the hopes of her mother's unfulfilled legacy. Elizabeth had survived the many threats to her rule, from conspiracies to religious wars, but she could never escape the constant reminder of Anne's tragic end, her beheading at the hands of the very man who had once loved her, Henry VIII. The court was filled with portraits of the past, and among them the image of Anne Boleyn stood with a quiet defiance. Elizabeth had inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and willpower, but more than that, she had inherited her mother's capacity to survive. Anne's story was not one of passive victimhood, but of an ambitious woman who sought power, only to see it slip through her fingers in a moment of tragic betrayal. Yet Anne's story was one that Elizabeth would never be able to forget. As the years passed, Elizabeth could not ignore the painful truth. She was the product of her mother's struggle for a place in history, a struggle that had ultimately led to Anne's undoing. At night, as Elizabeth sat alone in her chambers, her thoughts often turned to Anne. She wondered what her mother might have said if she could have seen the woman Elizabeth had become, the queen who would lead England into its golden age, the queen who would leave an indelible mark on the world. Would Anne have been proud? Would she have been heartbroken to see that her daughter had achieved the greatness she had once dreamed of, but at such a steep cost? Would she have been able to reconcile her own failure with Elizabeth's success? Elizabeth did not know the answer, but she did know that her mother's legacy was not one to be ignored. Anne's courage, her ambition, and her strength lived on in Elizabeth, and as much as Elizabeth worked to distance herself from the painful memories of her mother's tragic end, she could never erase the influence Anne had on her. In her quiet moments of reflection, Elizabeth often found herself wondering how much of her drive, her unyielding ambition, came from her mother's own dreams, now carried through the centuries by her daughter's steady hand. The court, ever watchful and ever calculating, knew well the history that ran through Elizabeth's veins. Many wondered how long the Queen would reign, knowing that she too had no male heir, no son to inherit the Tudor legacy. The whispers of the court grew louder as Elizabeth aged, her youth fading and her rule entering its twilight years. Would the Tudors survive beyond Elizabeth? Would her reign be a glorious end, or would the dynasty, like so many before it, fade into the annals of history, replaced by the next great power? But Elizabeth, for all the doubts surrounding her future, held fast to the understanding that her mother's legacy was not one of tragedy. Anne's ambition, her brilliance, and her unrelenting drive for power had not been in vain. For in Elizabeth's reign, the Tudor dynasty had not just survived, it had thrived. Elizabeth had given England an era of prosperity, of exploration, of cultural brilliance. Under her rule, England had become a force to be reckoned with on the world stage. The legacy of Anne Boleyn, though fractured by her tragic end, had shaped this very moment. Without Anne's ambition, without her determination, there would have been no Elizabeth, no Tudor Renaissance. Elizabeth had faced her own challenges, both personal and political. But it was Anne's story that had taught her how to fight, how to endure, and how to rise above the circumstances of her birth. Anne had never achieved the greatness she sought, but her daughter Elizabeth had accomplished what Anne could only have dreamed of. Elizabeth carried her mother's hopes with her, quietly, always beneath the surface. In the end, it was not just Elizabeth's own determination that led her to greatness. It was the quiet strength of Anne Boleyn, whose shadow lingered long after her death, that gave Elizabeth the will to succeed. The reflection on Anne's legacy became a source of quiet strength for Elizabeth. She came to realize that her mother's fall, her tragic end, was not the defining moment of her story. Instead, it was the continuation of her mother's ambition, her mother's desire for a better England that lived on. Elizabeth would be the last of the Tudors, but she would not be the last to carry the flame of Anne Boleyn's hope. Years have passed, and the weight of the crown that Elizabeth once donned so cautiously now feels as natural to her as the very air she breathes. Her reign has flourished, marking a golden age of English power, culture, and exploration. The sails of the English ships catch the winds of new worlds, bringing riches and power back to the shores of her kingdom. The arts have bloomed under her reign, and the name of England is spoken with respect and awe across Europe. Yet beneath this remarkable success, the echoes of her mother's fall still linger, quiet but persistent. As Elizabeth ages, the final chapters of her reign begin to unfold, with a sense of inevitable reflection. The once vibrant courts are now quieter, the grand processions more solemn, as the Queen's health, though still resilient, begins to fail. The relentless pursuit of power, the years of political maneuvering, and the weight of leadership have all taken their toll. But Elizabeth remains steadfast, even as her body betrays her. She continues to rule with the same intellect and will that has defined her reign from the very beginning. Her mind often wanders to the past, to the moments when she stood as a young woman in the shadow of Anne Boleyn. She recalls the stories her tutors told her, the whispered legends of her mother's rise and fall, and how that turbulent legacy shaped not only her own character, but the very fabric of her kingdom. Elizabeth knows that her legacy is not just built on her own strength, but on the shoulders of the woman who dared to defy a king, a queen who fought for her place in history, and who, though her life ended in tragedy, gave birth to a ruler who would shape the future of England. Her mother's death had set in motion a chain of events that brought Elizabeth to power, but it was Elizabeth who would redefine what it meant to be a queen. As she walked the halls of the royal palace, now quieter with the absence of her closest advisors, Elizabeth reflected on the way Anne's dreams had unfolded, through her own hands, into the very life she led today. Anne Boleyn, the woman who had been cast aside by history, had not failed her daughter. Anne's ambition, her strength, her hope for England had been carried into Elizabeth's own heart. She may have been the daughter of a fallen queen, but she had lived to be a monarch in her own right, stronger, wiser, and more beloved than any of her predecessors. Elizabeth's triumphs were legendary. She had outlived countless rivals, conquered enemies both within and outside of England, and faced the relentless demands of being a ruler in a world that sought to tear her down. In the face of countless plots to dethrone her, she remained unbowed. Her decisions, though often deeply unpopular with the court, had brought peace and stability to a kingdom once ravaged by religious wars and foreign threats. She established England as a formidable force in European politics, standing resolutely as the last Tudor monarch, the final echo of Anne's bloodline. As the years passed, Elizabeth found herself looking not to the future, but to the past. She thought of her mother not as the woman who had been beheaded at the hands of her father, but as the woman who had fought for her place in a world that seemed to offer nothing to women except submission. Anne's dreams, once crushed beneath the weight of her tragic end, had blossomed in the reign of her daughter. Elizabeth had outlived Anne's downfall and given England the peace, prosperity, and strength that had once seemed so unattainable. In her final years, Elizabeth considered the price of her long reign. The weight of the crown had never been light, and though she ruled with dignity and grace, the loneliness of the throne was often unbearable. The spectre of marriage, which had once seemed so impossible to avoid, had remained her constant companion throughout her life. The suitors came, and the courtship flourished, but the queen remained unmoved, unwilling to surrender her power to any man, unwilling to risk her kingdom's fate on the uncertain foundations of marriage. She had never allowed herself to fall in love, not with a man or with the idea of a future that could threaten her reign. She had become the Virgin Queen, not by choice, but by necessity. Elizabeth knew that her reign, as remarkable as it was, would end one day. Her legacy, however, would be immortal. Her name would be etched into the history books, not as a woman who was the victim of her circumstances, but as one who overcame them, as a ruler who knew how to wield power with intelligence, with wisdom, and with a deep, unwavering sense of purpose. She had faced the challenges of being a woman in a man's world, a queen in a kingdom where her very gender had once made her an impossibility. And yet, she had triumphed. In her final days, Elizabeth often found herself reflecting on her mother. In Anne's dreams, in her ambition, and in her ultimate sacrifice, Elizabeth had found the blueprint for her own success. Anne had laid the groundwork for the world that Elizabeth now ruled, and while Elizabeth had transcended the tragedy of her mother's life, she had never forgotten the price Anne had paid. As Elizabeth's health declined, and the court began to prepare for the inevitable moment when her reign would end, the entire kingdom held its breath. The great queen, who had been the beacon of hope and strength for so many years, was growing old, and with her the last flame of the Tudor dynasty flickered. Yet, in the hearts of the English people, Elizabeth's legacy would endure long after she was gone. Her reign would be remembered as the time when England had found its strength, its voice, and its place in the world. The final days of Elizabeth's reign are marked by the quiet hum of history, the soft passing of time that seems to stand still for a moment. The once vibrant and bustling court of England has become quieter, more reflective. The sounds of laughter and music that once filled the halls now seem faint, as the Queen's age, once hidden behind her regal demeanour, has begun to show itself. She no longer walks with the same strength and energy, the weight of the years pressing down on her, like the heavy cold stone of her royal palace. Yet even as she ages, Elizabeth remains every bit the Queen, proud, regal, and unyielding in the face of the inevitable. Her reign has been one of unparalleled success, but it is also one marked by sacrifice. Elizabeth has given England everything: her loyalty, her wisdom, her power, and most of all, her heart. She has lived her entire life in the public eye, her every decision, her every move scrutinized. And yet, despite the crown that rests upon her brow, she has always been alone. The marriage proposals that came and went, the courtships that promised much but never fulfilled her, have all led to the same solitary end. The queen who had everything, but never the one thing she desired most, a partner with whom to share the burden of her reign. Now, in the quiet of her chambers, Elizabeth reflects on the life she has led. The weight of her reign has been immense, but it is not the political struggles or the religious wars that occupy her thoughts now. It is the knowledge that she, the last of the Tudors, is approaching the end of her rule. The kingdom she has so carefully nurtured, the world she has created, will continue on without her, and yet the question that lingers in her mind is one that she has carried her whole life. What will become of her legacy? In the stillness of her room, Elizabeth often contemplates the path her mother, Anne Boleyn, had walked, the path of ambition, of defiance, and ultimately of tragedy. Anne, who had dreamed of a dynasty, of an England ruled by her son, had given birth to a daughter who would fulfill all that she had dreamed of, and yet the crown had come at a great cost. Anne's name had been tarnished, her life cut short by the very king who had once adored her. Elizabeth, born of that tragedy, had risen to become the queen that her mother never had the chance to be, yet the weight of that legacy, that bloodshed, never truly left her. As the years have passed, Elizabeth has ruled with the wisdom born of her mother's sacrifice. She has seen the dangers of ambition, the fragility of power, and the inevitable toll that the crown takes on those who wear it. Yet she has done so with grace, with resilience, and above all, with the knowledge that her reign would be the final chapter of the Tudor dynasty. There would be no male heir to succeed her, no son to carry on the legacy of the house that her mother had once fought to build. The line of the Tudors would end with her, and the crown of England would pass to another. The thought of the future, of what would become of England after her death, occupies her mind more and more. She has never allowed herself to entertain the idea of marriage, to risk the stability of her kingdom for the sake of personal happiness. She has always known that her role was greater than herself, that the people of England depended on her. Yet, even in her final years, the loneliness of her reign is undeniable. The absence of a partner, a successor, leaves a hollow space within her heart, one that she has tried for so long to fill, with the love of her people, with the glory of her achievements, and with the weight of her responsibilities. But the quiet, the silence of her chambers in the dead of night reminds her of what she has lost, what could never be hers. As Elizabeth's health continues to decline, the question of her successor grows ever more pressing. The nation watches, anxiously, waiting for the Queen to name an heir. Elizabeth, however, remains resolute in her decision to leave no definitive heir. Her cousin James VI of Scotland is widely regarded as the successor, but Elizabeth never fully gives her approval. She, the last of the Tudors, will go to her grave, knowing that her dynasty will end with her, and that her life, for all its glory and triumph, has been one of sacrifice and solitude. In her final moments, Elizabeth remains the queen. She clings to her dignity, the same dignity that has defined her reign, as she prepares to face the inevitable. Her mind is clear, her heart steady, and her thoughts turn not to what she will leave behind, but to the future of the kingdom she has fought so hard to preserve. She knows that, in the end, it is not the crown that defines her, but her ability to lead with wisdom, to withstand the storms that have threatened her, and to do so with grace. Elizabeth's last breath comes not with fear, but with peace. She knows that her legacy will live on, not just in the pages of history, but in the hearts of those who remember her. The kingdom she built, the empire she nurtured, will endure beyond her time. Her reign, the final chapter of the Tudor dynasty, may have ended, but the strength and resilience she displayed will forever be woven into the fabric of England's history. And as the world mourns the passing of England's greatest queen, the echoes of Anne Boleyn's legacy remain. A legacy that was born of sacrifice, of ambition and of the enduring strength of the Tudor spirit. Though Anne's dreams were never fully realized, her daughter Elizabeth carried them to fruition in ways that the world could not have imagined. The Tudors may have fallen, but their story will never be forgotten. The quiet stillness of England's royal chambers mirrors the profound silence that has settled over the nation with Elizabeth's passing. The final breaths of the Virgin Queen echo not just within the stone walls of her palace, but through the very heart of the kingdom she shaped for over 4 decades. Her reign, so carefully crafted through trials and triumphs, has ended, and with it, the final chapter of the Tudor dynasty. The weight of centuries rests upon the shoulders of those left behind, as England stands on the precipice of a new era. But for now, there is only a hushed mourning, the people pausing, almost as if unwilling to accept that their queen, the queen they have known and revered, has slipped from this world. England, once defined by its vibrant and unyielding monarchy, now faces an uncertain future. The news of Elizabeth's death spreads quickly, sweeping through the cobblestone streets, into the royal courts and across the seas. The banners of the Tudor dynasty, once so proud, now hang limp in the courtyards, their vibrant reds and golds fading with the setting sun. There is no male heir to claim the throne, no son to carry on the lineage that Anne Boleyn, with such fierce ambition, had once hoped for. And yet, in the absence of a clear successor, a new figure emerges from the shadows of history, as though it were the natural order. James VI of Scotland, the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and the great-grandson of Henry VII. As the royal court gathers in solemn reflection, the court of Elizabeth's final days, now emptied of her presence, seems almost fragile, as if the very air around them has changed. The courtiers, once so quick to move, now shift uneasily, unsure of how to proceed in the absence of the Queen's steady hand. They had always known that Elizabeth's reign would come to an end. All monarchs must eventually pass. But no one was quite prepared for the moment when that inevitable truth would become reality. The grief is palpable, not just in the court but across the kingdom. The image of Elizabeth, immortalized in portraits, still dominates the royal palaces. The mourning, though deeply felt, is not just for the Queen who has left them, but for the end of an era, an end to the Tudor line that has defined England's greatness for so long. Elizabeth's legacy is a complex one, and in her death the nation turns inward, reflecting on the strength of her reign, the challenges she overcame, and the toll it took on her personal life. She was a queen who had never married, who had never shared her burden with another. Her marriage was to the crown, and her children, if they could be called that, were the people of England itself. The absence of a direct heir had always been a source of tension within her court, but Elizabeth had ruled in her own right, wielding power with intelligence and grace. And now, as she leaves the world, the question arises: who will continue her work? Who will step into the royal shoes that have been worn by so many of her ancestors and by herself? James, the son of Mary, and the heir to both the Scottish and English thrones, seems the logical choice. But with his ascension to the throne of England, the passing of Elizabeth marks the dawn of a new dynasty, one that will carry its own set of challenges, its own triumphs and failures. For Elizabeth, the last of the Tudors, her legacy is a weighty one, filled with both greatness and sacrifice. She had faced the turmoil of being a female monarch in a world ruled by men, and she had done so with remarkable success. Yet, her reign, though peaceful and prosperous in many ways, had also been one of deep loneliness, of personal sacrifice. She had been forced to place the kingdom above her own desires, and had never allowed herself the comfort of marriage or a family of her own. She had reigned with unmatched intellect and unwavering will. But, in the quiet moments of her final days, there was a deep, silent longing that she had carried with her throughout her life. The desire for a partner, for someone who could share her burden. Now, with Elizabeth gone, the weight of England's future falls not just on the shoulders of James, but on the country as a whole. The transition to the Stuart dynasty is not seamless. James faces resistance from those who feel that the Tudor line, with all its triumphs, has been prematurely cut off, its legacy incomplete. There are those who still look back at the reign of Henry VIII, and then at Elizabeth, with awe and pride. How could they not? The Tudors had brought England from the brink of disaster to the heights of greatness. But the passing of Elizabeth forces the question, what comes next? England is not just at a crossroads politically, but spiritually. The country has long been divided by religion. The Protestant Reformation that Henry VIII started, the tumultuous times under Mary the Firm, and the cautious yet determined Protestant reforms that Elizabeth brought to the country. The question of faith, of England's identity, looms large, and James, who comes from a lineage of both Catholic and Protestant blood, must navigate these dangerous waters. His ascension to the throne is not merely a political event, it is a spiritual one, for it represents the union of two nations, two religions, and two histories. As the court prepares for the official transition to James, England holds its breath. The passing of Elizabeth, though marked by grief, is also a moment of reflection, a moment for the country to recognize how far it has come and how much is yet to come. Elizabeth's reign, while ending with no male heir, has nonetheless set England on a path of success, one that will continue but not without struggle. As Elizabeth's body is laid to rest, her spirit seems to linger, a quiet guardian watching over the kingdom she loved, her legacy enduring through the halls of her palace and the hearts of her people. The death of Elizabeth, though it ends the Tudor dynasty, opens the door to a new era. The legacy of the Tudors, built by Anne Boleyn, sustained by Elizabeth, and carried forward by James, will shape the future of England for centuries to come. But as the royal procession moves toward its final destination, one thing remains clear. The echo of the Tudors will never truly fade. As the funeral procession for Elizabeth winds its way through the streets of London, the city itself seems to hold its breath, as if waiting for the final echoes of the Tudor dynasty to fade into the past. The air is thick with the solemnity of the moment, and the shadows of the great city stretch long across the cobblestones, the silence heavy with the weight of history. The streets, usually bustling with the energy of life, are eerily still as the people of England mourn the loss of their queen, the queen who had defined an era, whose name had become synonymous with England itself. Elizabeth's passing marks not just the end of a monarch, but the conclusion of an entire chapter in English history. The legacy of the Tudors, that powerful, tempestuous family, had shaped the course of the kingdom for generations. Through triumphs and tragedies, through war, betrayal and love, the Tudors had steered England through its most formative years, and now, with Elizabeth's death, that era is over. The streets of London are filled with the whispers of what will come next. The people know that with Elizabeth's death comes a new age, an age that will see the passing of power from the last Tudor monarch to the first Stuart king. James VI of Scotland, Elizabeth's cousin, and the great-grandson of Henry VII, has already begun his journey south, crossing into England to claim his inheritance. The transition of power, though politically necessary, is not without its tensions. England, a kingdom built on the back of the Tudors, is now facing a dramatic shift in its monarchy. The Stuarts, though related by blood, are a different breed entirely. They come from a northern, more distant realm, one that is not as tightly woven into the fabric of English politics, and the court watches with bated breath as James prepares to ascend the throne. James's arrival in England is met with a mix of anticipation and skepticism. His supporters, many of whom are hopeful for a united kingdom under his rule, celebrate the dawn of a new era. Yet, there are those who cannot forget the achievements of the Tudors, the long reigns of Henry VIII and Elizabeth Bartham, and they wonder if James will be able to maintain the greatness they had built. The legacy of the Tudors hangs heavy on his shoulders, and the kingdom, still in mourning, is unsure of what the future holds under his leadership. As James takes the throne, he does so not with the same commanding presence that Elizabeth once had, but with a certain quiet determination. He is not a man known for grand speeches or overwhelming charisma, but for his intellectual ability, his deep knowledge of political theory, and his natural charm. The shift in power, though official, is not without its challenges. James inherits a kingdom that is divided by religion, by class, and by the ever-present tensions between monarchy and parliament. The Protestant Reformation, set into motion by Henry VIII and continued under Elizabeth, has divided England from the Catholic powers of Europe, and James, with his own Protestant leanings, must navigate the religious tensions carefully. In addition, the kingdom is still struggling with the weight of feudal allegiances, with regional loyalties that pull against the unity James seeks to build. Despite these challenges, James is determined to unite the two kingdoms of England and Scotland, a feat that his predecessors, especially Elizabeth, had only dreamed of. He believes deeply in the divine right of kings, and though England has never seen a monarch quite like him, he sets about solidifying his power. He is the first king to rule both England and Scotland, and his reign is marked by his ambition to bring the two realms closer together, forging a united kingdom that spans the British Isles. His vision for the future is one of strength, peace, and unity, ideals that, for all his faults, he will work toward during his reign. However, the transition is not seamless. The death of Elizabeth Upham, a monarch who had managed to balance the tensions of the Reformation, the rising influence of Parliament, and the growing pressures of foreign powers, has left a power vacuum. James, though experienced in his own right, is not the only one with a claim to the throne, and some factions within England's elite begin to question his right to rule. The first years of his reign are filled with political maneuvering, with James trying to solidify his position and keep the court united behind him. The transition of power brings its own challenges, and though the Stuart line now claims the throne, Elizabeth's legacy of intelligence, shrewdness, and political finesse will continue to cast a long shadow over James's reign. As James's rule progresses, it becomes clear that Elizabeth's enduring legacy has given him the foundation upon which to build his own reign. The groundwork that Elizabeth laid, from the stabilization of England's finances to the consolidation of Protestantism, has given James a kingdom that is ready for growth. And yet, in the quiet moments of his reign, as he sits upon his throne, James knows that he must live up to the expectations of a people who had been shaped by the formidable reign of Elizabeth. Her legacy is one of strength, but it is also one of sacrifice. A sacrifice that has shaped James's own rule in ways he may never fully understand. As the years pass, England begins to adapt to the reign of King James. Though the kingdom is still divided in some ways, his leadership helps to bring a sense of continuity and stability to a land that had been rocked by the changes of the past. The question of Elizabeth's legacy never fades, however. For every English monarch after James, Elizabeth's shadow looms large. Her reign had been one of peace and prosperity, and no one, not James, nor any king who follows, will ever quite escape the memory of what she achieved. And so, as England moves into a new era, the memory of Elizabeth the Firm remains firmly etched in the hearts of her people. The final chapter of the Tudor dynasty has been written, and with Elizabeth's death, the Tudor flame has been extinguished. But the legacy she left behind, in her kingdom, in her people, and in the very fabric of English history, will never fade. The kingdom she built, the culture she nurtured, and the spirit of her reign will carry on, long after the passing of the Tudor line.